Hello, friends. It's Chapo.
Came to Italy, and it came to Italy in the form of massive social unrest and eventual violence carried out by far left activists who demanded a communist revolution. They were doing this in defiance of the existing Communist Party, who they thought were bureaucratic and out of touch. They wanted to force the final conflict with capitalism in the streets of Italy. And the vanguard of this were the Red Brigades, they were very similar to the groups like Baader-Meinhof in Germany, Red Army faction, and Japanese Red Army. You know the types. Have you seen Carlos or Baader-Meinhof complex? That kind of thing. Ex-students or the weathermen less effectively or effectually in the United States. They disaffected radical students who've gone past demonstrations and nonviolence and want to inspire a general revolution through acts of exemplary violence in the form of bank robberies and bombings and assassinations. And they are battling not only the Italian state, but they are also battling the forces of Gladio. So as this crisis becomes the greatest threat to the post-war order since 1948, Gladio kicks into gear by instituting a plan to neutralize the left's insurgency in Italy through what would later be found out to be called the strategy of tension. And this is another thing that sounds crazy but is true, is real. The note was found, the thing. So a lot of the way we know a lot of this stuff is that one of the heads of this organization's house was raided during the investigation in the 80s related to that Vatican bank crisis I talked about. And they found membership rolls and meeting notes. And one of the notes was about this. And the strategy of tension was a program of heightening the violence in Italy that is associated with the left through acts of false flag attacks by infiltrating leftist organizations or imitating leftist organizations, doing spectacular acts of violence in order to make the general public demand an authoritarian rule to stop the violence and the threat to them. That was the idea as laid out there. Make people so scared of what's happening that they will accept any degree of authoritarian rule to end it, including the reestablishment of fascism under the same people who had administered it last time. Anything to stop the violence, which they would associate with the left because the attacks would be blamed on the left. So the way that the strategy of tension ended up expressing itself was through the actions of a group called Ordine Nero, which was a neo-fascist group in Italy that was associated with the Italian military and, of course, the CIA. And their first big act of violence was a bomb, a bomb that was planted on a train from Florence to Munich in 1974 that exploded in a tunnel in San Benito via di Sambro. And it killed 12 people, injured 48. And it was immediately it was connected to leftist militants who were then flipped and revealed to actually be associated with this fascist group, Ordine Nuevo. So the 70s were sort of bookend. The years of lead, the spectacular violence were sort of bookended on the one end in 74 by this which is known as the Italica Express bombing. And then in 1980, the bombing of a train station in Bologna that killed 85 people and injured over 200. And once again, the association there between the connection between the people who carried out these bombings was established very early on, and their connections to the far right were established almost instantly afterwards. So these are attacks that we know for relative certainty were carried out by fascists in Italy who wanted to provoke a fascist takeover by mimicking left-wing violence. There's one more spectacular act of Gladio in the 70s, that is more conjectural, I guess. This is where we're talking about how the degrees of knowledge and evidence are different in different areas. Some of the parts of this vast ocean are much shallower than others. And one of the murkiest is the 1978 kidnapping and murder of the Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro. Aldo Moro was a leader of the Christian Democrats, who were the main party that was the broad capitalist coalition party opposed to the communists, and which had held power uninterruptedly in Italy since 1948. And during this period, during the tumult, during this incredibly unstable era, when even though the Christian Democrats were in charge, the prime minister would change on a monthly basis practically. The Moro, toward the end of his life, began toying with the idea of creating a more stable governing coalition with part of his party, the Christian Democrats, and the communists, and bring them into government for the first time. They would be the first official communist party to govern in a Western European country since the end of the Second World War. And this, of course, was no bueno. And in fact, before he was kidnapped, Moro was told during a visit to the United States by Henry Kissinger that to do so, to get in bed with a communist, would be incredibly dangerous for him. He basically veiledly threatened him in a mafia-style way if he were to bring the communists into government. And it shook him to his core. He was terrified after hearing that, and he kind of wanted to just quit politics completely. So in 1978, in March, he was kidnapped in a kind of a spectacular precision strike with guys dressed as cops just turned on his motorcade and murked his entire security detail without killing him, pulled him out, and then spirited him away and got away cleanly. Amazing operation, which was later blamed on the Red Brigade, which, as I discussed, like most Western guerrilla violent groups during this period, was made up of goofus students, not a lot of professional military operations. They never really carried out those. But anyway, Moro was held for 55 days and was eventually murdered and found dead in the trunk of a car. And of course, in these conditions, the possible agreement with the communist standard government, that was off the table. It never happened. So that was good. So there are direct connections between the Italian neo-fascist scene and, kind of most interestingly, the Italian military and the people who killed Moro. One of the more glaring ones is that the building that he was held in for part of his kidnapping was owned by the Italian military intelligence. I mean, coincidence maybe, but once again, this is where we talk about evidence getting thinner, but the lure of creating a narrative, the sensuous lure of creating a narrative that involves something as amazing and outrageous as a false flag assassination of a fucking head of government in order to prevent a communist gaining power in Italy. It's an incredibly enticing story. And so, of course, subconsciously, the burden of proof you're demanding reduces as you gain details that you want to add to your narrative. So I can't say that I believe to any certainty that Aldo Moro was killed as part of Gladio, but I cannot discount the possibility. And I just have to weigh my demand for stable evidence against my frank desire for a satisfying and coherent narrative. Okay. So those are the years of lead. Now's the moment where I will stop and say, while this is happening in Italy and before, Gladio's type operations are being set up all throughout the rest of Europe. So let me take this moment to just sort of say some of the other stuff. We'll do a little tour of Europe and talk about what other stuff the Gladio type operations were up to in the different European countries. So in France, for example, the hyper right wing types who would make up OAS and attempt to assassinate de Gaulle, prevent him from leaving Algeria, those kind of people, the French ultra right, they're of course co opted as part of this operation, although the French being so prickly and hostile to NATO over NATO authority, they always kept him at arm's length. In Greece, generals who were on the CIA payroll, they carried out a coup in 1967 that overthrew the democratic government there and ruled for a decade. In Turkey, the name for this operation was counter-guerrilla. And counter-guerrilla, even though Turkey had never been occupied during World War II, afterwards, the CIA was intimately associated with the emerging Turkish, what became deep state, their intelligence apparatus, and their military high command. The guys who ended up being what was called accurately by Erdogan a deep state, which he has now largely overthrown and reconstituted on his side, is actually kind of brilliant. But at this point, it was still very much a hand in glove thing with Washington. It was carrying out American prerogatives in the region. And so counter guerrilla, some of the stuff the counter guerrilla is accused of doing is founding the Grey Wolf nationalist paramilitary organization that we like to that we make fun of with the name of our fans. Promise we're not fascist, is just irony, god damn it. But so creating the Grey Wolves and doing things like perhaps carrying out the Taksim Square massacre of 1977, in which a massive left-wing demonstration that was in the square was fired on from concealed positions in nearby buildings. Over 40 people were killed, and the people who carried it out were never found through an amazingly botched investigation that left a lot of people wondering if it was associated with this Turkish deep state. A question that became even more potent in 1980 when the Turkish state was overthrown in a military coup that was headed by the Turkish director of the counter-guerrilla program. So that was a win. In Spain, the death of Franco in 1975 created political ferment for the first time, and the dictatorship broke down, and a new emerging multi-party democracy burst forth. And the